Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Let's turn to the federal court in California where Hunter Biden was on Thursday, eventually, after some back and forth with prosecutors and the judge, pleading guilty to failing to pay income taxes, about $1.4 million, including on money earned abroad. Let's listen to a clip of Hunter's attorney, Abby Lowell, explaining why he decided to make that pleading.
Hunter decided to enter his plea to protect those he loves from unnecessary hurt and cruel humiliation. This plea prevents that kind of show trial that would have not provided all the facts or served any real point in justice. He will now move on with us to the sentencing phase, while keeping open the options to raise the many clear issues with this case on appeal.
Bill, to me, that statement is a bit hard to take, calling this a show trial. Remember those IRS whistleblowers who testified about interference in their investigation in this case. They made the argument that anybody else, any other American who had failed to pay $1.4 million taxes in this way would be hit with felonies.
Yeah, and look at it. The charges would be far more severe if the special prosecutor, David Weiss, hadn't let the statute of limitations expire on what would be far greater charges resulting from the years that Joe Biden was vice president. So Hunter Biden is still lucky. I can't understand the lawyer because it says to me his legal team is either really bad at serving his interests, or his case is so overwhelmingly against him, they have to constantly throw these Hail Marys up. Remember, there's been a lot of more motions than just this one, and they've all been shot down. And Hunter Biden still, at the last minute, wants to say, oh yeah, I'll plead guilty, but because I'm so selfless, I'm going to maintain my innocence. I'm not sure the court would accept that. My understanding is also that's usually up to the prosecutors, whether they accept that or not. It's just more of what Hunter Biden is. Hunter Biden really exposed so much corruption. You had the press in suppressing the New York Post story about the laptop. Now we know it's true. You had his father insisting in 2 presidential debates his son didn't get a dime from China, and Hunter has pleaded guilty. Yes, he did. So I think they're trying to finally bury the issue.
Kim, the drama on Thursday was not knowing whether the judge was going to accept this kind of have it both ways plea that Hunter initially tried to float, or at least his attorneys did. It's called an Alford plea, and it's kind of a fascinating thing where the defendant pleads formally guilty while also maintaining that he is not guilty of the crime that he is going to waive the trial for. And I think maybe listeners will be surprised that that's something that is even allowed in the criminal justice system, pleading guilty and saying you're going to accept the punishment, but still maintaining that you haven't done anything wrong.
Yeah, this is something that comes out of a 1970 Supreme Court decision. And what it says is that you do have the ability to accept a plea while maintaining your innocence. That being said, this is highly frowned upon by the Department of Justice. Its manual says that it should be used exceptionally rarely. It has to be signed off on by top officials at the Department of Justice. And you can see why, right? Because you end up with this bizarre scenario where you have somebody going to jail, potentially, because that's the sentence, who's still claiming that they are innocent. And DOJ doesn't like that kind of open-ended, unclear result. So it was no surprise in the end. No one should think that Hunter Biden was being treated differently than anyone else. His lawyer tried to make the case, oh, these Alford pleas happen all over the place. They don't actually happen a ton. And he wasn't being treated differently than anyone else in the Justice Department rejecting it, or the judge rejecting it either. They are indeed not as common, which is why most people probably haven't ever heard of them. But to me is just really striking that yet once again, Hunter Biden is trying to have it all ways. Look, we heard a lot over the past couple of years since this drama has burst forth about his drug addiction and his recovery. And by the way, I think a lot of people can be very sympathetic to addiction problems. We all know a lot of people that have had that issue. Also, they can even see some admiration for him for turning his life around. That being said, an enormous aspect of admitting that you had drug problems, and he talks about it all the time as a sort of an excuse. But when you recover, one of the things you do is accept responsibility for some of the things that you did while you were an addict. And that is what is lacking from Hunter Biden here all along, is he wants people to feel for his difficult, troubled times. I get it. But he won't simply say, look, I'm guilty of having done these things. Had he done that in the beginning, by the way, a lot of time and energy would have been saved, and he might be looking at far fewer charges or reduced sentences than he faces now, both, by the way, for this tax trial and for the gun charges he was convicted on earlier this year.
And of course, Bill, Dad is still sitting in the Oval Office for several months and has the pardon power. And President Biden has suggested that he will not do that. This is the statement from the White House press secretary on Thursday. She said, I'm not able to comment on it, but I can say that it is still very much a no to the questions I have gotten about if the president is going to pardon, unquote. But Bill, I guess I wouldn't be surprised if he changes his mind about that sometime between now and noon on January 20th, 2025, when he leaves the Oval Office. Or at the very least, you can imagine him doing some sort of commuting of Hunter's sentence, so he will not spend time in jail, even if the conviction is allowed to stand.
Yeah, I think what you point out is the capstone of what Kim was saying. Hunter Biden has been privileged his whole life. He made his money by marketing his dad's name and exploiting the contacts and exploiting rides on Air Force Two and so forth. And this is part of it. The reason for this plea is because he's the president's son and he thinks his father is going to pardon him. It doesn't matter what Joe Biden has said up to Election Day. After Election Day, on November 6th, we'll find out what he really means, because there's no political cost to pardoning Hunter Biden after that. People might tend to forgive it. But Hunter is counting on that. I suspect we'd see a much more humble approach by Hunter Biden if he wasn't counting on his father's pardon in the event of any jail sentence.
Kim, what's your take on this? I find it hard to believe that Joe Biden, the family man, as he always presents himself, is not going to do something for Hunter before he leaves office. And I find it harder to imagine that he wouldn't.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a very high probability of a pardon outright for both of these cases. But, I guess if he wanted to maintain some semblance of trying to be a little bit less brazen in this, he could commute the sentences as well, too. It seems unlikely that Hunter would have to begin serving any sentence before that time. So you could potentially entirely save him any jail time. Look, it looks really ugly because let's not forget the background here as well, too. I mean, this is not just about Joe Biden pardoning Hunter, his own son, using the power of his office to help out his son, but it's rather the background and the history of what Hunter did, which was trading on the Biden family name. We've written a lot about what was very clearly the Biden family business, which Joe was involved in too. Despite protestations from the White House and from the president, we know that while we haven't seen any huge amounts of money flow into Joe Biden's bank account, so what? This was a guy who was willingly getting on the speakerphone when Hunter was putting him on it to impress his clients and friends, showing up at meetings so that Hunter could seal the deal. Hunter was using his name and throwing it around. There was clearly some nascent idea, potentially while the then vice president was out of office, to potentially come in on a deal. It looked like that didn't happen in the end. But there was connection there, far greater than anything Joe Biden has ever admitted to. So bear that in mind, that if that pardon or commutation comes, that this is not just absolution for his son, but a way of disappearing in a certain way his own behavior in all of this.